Hello, everybody. Good morning, Europe. Good evening, Australia and New Zealand. And a very special kia ora to the meetup at Thislin in Wellington. So this is the second day of virtual StripeCon. And before we get started for today, let's do a quick recap of yesterday. We have heard about advanced content management, Silverstripe 5, Silverstripe-based tourism management, about project boilerplates and skeletons, modules, recipes, theming, all that stuff. We have heard about next level PDF generation, local dev environments, and we have heard a pretty decent Silverstripe beginners workshop about how to get started when working on a new Silverstripe page. I enjoyed it very much, and I hope so did you. Today, it's going to be all about GraphQL, headless, content first, security, and DevOps. I am thrilled. And now, the moment has come. And when he gets on stage, I want all of you to get wild on the chat. The man that doesn't need any further introduction, I'm inviting to the stage, Aaron Carlino, AKA Uncle Cheese. Aaron, are you with us? Yeah, good to see you, man. How you doing?
Dude, that was an awesome intro. I don't think I've ever been set up that way. Like, where's what kind of golden trophy am I walking away with here?
It was my pleasure. So, are you ready to kick it off for today?
I am pumped.
Very good. So, I say, stage is yours.
All right, cheers. All right, let's go. This is so. And what a thrill to be speaking at StripeCon EU. It's something I've talked about doing or been wanting to doing, even been invited to do several times in the last several years. And so here we go. What a great opportunity to just do it without a whole lot of hassle. Just beaming right up to Europe. Is this? I'm assuming the sound is okay. I can just check the chat and see if anyone's complaining. I guess I can see like the live feed. It is, if you hear like some interference or anything, any kind of noise, it's just a windy night in Wellington, and that's typical. So just have to deal with that. So yeah, so this talk is about APIs in Silverstripe, and the first thing I thought of when I started drafting this talk was just kind of the Groundhog Day effect. Like, it was 2017 when I spoke in Silverstripe Wellington about, StripeCon Wellington. And my topic was going headless with Silverstripe, and so here we are again, kind of talking about the same thing. And like, you know, it just goes to show, like, you know, these things when you're talking about what's coming next, it's pretty slow to evolve actually a lot of the time. And so you know, it shows you that like we were talking about the right things at the time, and it also kind of shows that that things do move a lot more slowly than you think. You know, I think if I had predicted what we'd be talking about in 2020, I would have thought like, okay, we figured this whole thing out, and maybe there's not a whole lot to talk about, but there still is, and it's very relevant. So just a quick bit about what I'll be talking about. So we're just going to kind of set up the case for APIs, and just kind of go through like what, you know, what's the value statement here. And I'm going to get into just one example of how to do API-driven sites in Silverstripe, and that's going to just talk about Gatsby. There's a lot of these sort of tools out there that we're going to hear about, but I'm going to zero in on Gatsby because that's one that I'm familiar with, and we'll make a case for that. We'll talk a bit about Gatsby with Silverstripe CMS, and then we're going to evolve into a talk about GraphQL-4, which is quite. So just get right into it. So why APIs? You know, this comes up a lot. Why are we what's all the fuss about if you haven't been sold yet? So I think one thing you really have to establish here with the API conversation is just how important data is to your clients, right? This is like the sovereign territory of your client. And so it's theirs, right? It's in their possession. A lot of the dev effort is just going into stuff that you have, you know, might have intellectual property over internally, and things that you feel free to work on internally without a whole lot of friction. But this data thing, you know, it's like going into the embassy. So you know, just imagine like the conversation when you you hire a contractor to do the new feature, and you have to tell the client, okay, I've given him access to the repo, and he's downloaded the code, and now all we need from you is just a dump from the database and all your uploaded assets and everything. We'll just email it to him, and that's cool, right? You're not going to have that conversation with a lot of high-profile clients. Some might be okay with it, that's totally their preference. But like, this is a domain that is really kind of sacred and sovereign, and so the idea that you can provide something that allows clients to get access to their data easily, and sort of subvert the idea that the CMS is like the gatekeeper of that content and kind of holding it hostage in a way, is really important. So this is kind of where we are right now, is that clients love their data, and we need to make sure they have access to it as easily as possible and in as many ways as possible. The other thing is this is kind of a more principled approach, but like, just, theoretically, what we're talking about is the separation of the consumption of content versus the delivery of content. And so for so long, we've just coupled those two things, right? So you want some content, it's in a CMS, here's a page, right? That's kind of the atomic structure of the content. And that's just too big. We need to go more granular than that. Clients are thinking about mobile apps. They're thinking about delivering their content to other platforms. They have federated content, whatever it is. We cannot be in the business of like determining how that content is delivered on top of, keeping the content as well. So that separation is really important. So what kind of tooling are we talking about here? When you say, okay, I bought into the idea of API driven, this is where I want to go with it. What are my options? So there's a lot of options out there. The things you're going to hear most about, I think, are, it's safe to say, Gatsby and Next are kind of like really both competitive in this space and are making a lot of traction. They serve very similar goals. They are on a pretty convergent paths, and they are both wonderful. I'm not here to really preach about either one, but I do have information to give you about Gatsby, so I thought I'd start with that. So Gatsby, I like to think about how these technologies, there's so much stuff happening all the time, and so I like to illustrate it with what I would call the fanboy funnel. And you have this inverted pyramid kind of thing where there's just so much happening at the top, and I would call that the swarm. It's just all the stuff happening on Twitter and all the micro packages and this and that, and I tried this thing and I made this little to-do app. And the conversation in the cafeteria where it's just a bunch of noise, but if you really zoom in your ears on something, you can pick out a conversation and figure out what's going on. That's the swarm, and most of us don't want anything to do with it, but God bless the people who are in there. So you kind of graduate, those things filter down into a category called the herd of it. So you have a meetup like this, you got 50 devs in a room, 10 of them maybe have heard of the thing, they know what it does, they can talk a little bit about it. Maybe one of them is, right? I know what that is. Those things tend to filter down into what I call the CV items. And now you have something that is like literally just an attribute of a developer. It's made it so far that you can actually just say, I am this type of developer, and you would put it on your CV. I'm a React developer. I'm a Kubernetes engineer, right? These things, they become a marketable attribute, and it's something you want to be a part of, and there's value there. So very rarely these things filter down into the impactful, which is when they make permanent changes to paradigms. So things that make it into browser APIs, for instance. A great example of this is jQuery. Most people don't really talk about it, but jQuery made it into the browser. We all just have to accept that. Like when you work with a document in the browser now, you're using jQuery. They did it, so good on them. Sass and Less, they kind of influenced CSS as well. So impactful things, right? I'm most interested in, what's happening here in sort of being ahead of the curve. I really like this idea of kind of getting in early, maybe buying low so you can later sell high on the CV, right? You want to be like, okay, what are people talking about and where's this going? And I'm going to take a chance and see where it is. And I think Gatsby is kind of right here right now, right? So I want to talk about this guy, and this is a bit of a sidetrack to set up my next point about Gatsby, but this is Laurie Voss. He's the founder of NPM. Wise beyond his old years, I know. But So NPM's amazing. It serves 11 million developers, 6 billion package downloads per week. 97% of app code is sourced from NPM. We don't ever talk about that. You only write 3% of your app. Like, what are we doing? What business is this? And it actually creates more data than it provides. These packages are so small and the downloads are so frequent that the logs exceed the size of the packages. It's incredible what this guy built, right? Now, Laurie is an interesting character. I listened to an interview with him, and he's got a good story. So he comes from the country of Trinidad. And Trinidad is a country you're so familiar with that you didn't even realize that this is not Trinidad. This is just a drawing that my 3-year-old made of his friend James. So the real Trinidad is right here off the coast of Venezuela, and it's a small country, right? So like he has this really simple life, and in 1996 this happens. Trinidad gets the internet. Not too late. Like, I mean, that's kind of on par with when a lot of us got the internet, right? That was kind of, you know, pretty much the transition a lot of us were going through at the time. And what he notices is I found quite remarkable. He said, like, look, we didn't have, like, you know, the big TV shows and the movies and the publications that they had up in North America. You know, we're kind of just off the map. We're not on the global stage. But I went to the Trinidad government homepage, and then I went to the White House homepage, and they were kind of like the same. Like, these were kind of just really similar things, and all of a sudden my little country was basically doing the same things that the big countries were, right? And so he sees it as like this really like equalizing technology, and bets really hard on HTML, and he's like, I'm going to learn this HTML. And in 4 hours he said he built something that looked exactly like the New York Times in 1996, literally a screenshot. I believe it uses CSS Grid, but he was building what the New York Times was doing, and that is so cool. I can imagine like that's going to be a really awesome feeling, right? When you're in this small country off the map and you're doing this, right? You don't have power to make a big movie, you don't have the power to write a magazine or like make a big song, but you can do this. So it really gets at this core value of web, and we stray from this so often, that simplicity is just a core value of what we do. It's such a simple technology, and we tend to overthink things a lot, and rarely do we get back to basics. I'm really drawn to this tweet that came out about a year ago. My apprentice started yesterday, and they built a 3-page website. He lists 3 HTML files in a CSS document. It's faster, more accessible than your website and mine. Great to go back to basics and realize how much bullshit we heap on top of our websites. And I first saw this, and my gut reaction was like, you have the psychology of previous investment. You're so invested in all these things. Like, oh, but what about, you didn't think of, and I'm just like, I can't refute this. He's right. That's exactly what you should do. That's exactly how you should build that website. And if you do anything else, you're wrong. So like, what a great perspective that is. Like, we need to remember that. So, a lot of this conversation brings me to what a concept that, I don't know if I've coined this term. I'm going to say I have. I coined this term, technological gravity, which is just this idea that like we stray so far from our core values, but invariably we come back to something that's just incrementally better, right? So if we look at how that applies to web, right? Go back to like when I first got into the internet, I think it was HTML3. The first thing I remember is frame sets. We just completely perverted HTML and the whole idea of the document by chucking everything in frames. And then I remember later on, everyone was doing Shockwave. And I think the pinnacle of this was when we just started like treating the browser as a container for a desktop browser. And that was like the biggest like perversion of the web and I don't think it got any worse than that. We started to go down a bit, and Flash was kind of like Java applets, but it had some browser APIs, so that was cool. Web 2.0 came along, jQuery UI standardized all that. And now we're looking at React and Vue and HTML5, and you kind of look around and you go, well, shit, this is just kind of HTML and CSS again, only it's a little bit better. And so, we go so far out, and then we come back and to these incremental improvements. I think about things like, the first time I had a digital camera, and it was so amazing that you could take a photo without film, and then the printer came out, and it was like, well, you can print digital photos? Like, that's amazing. And you had to stop and say, no, we've been doing that. Like, that's a camera, right? So, we go far out and we make very small strides incrementally. So wow, you can do a website using HTML and CSS. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about building a website with HTML and CSS. Let's not get too far away here. So Gatsby is a static site generator for React. And if you hear that term static site generator, you're probably thinking, okay, there's like, a billion of those. What sets this apart? And so there's a pretty clear distinction why you would use Gatsby and not any of these myriad other ones. So Gatsby renders your static assets from the server, but immediately hydrates the page as a single page application. This is transparent to the user in most cases if you've done it right. So you should never notice that once your page is loaded within a fraction of a second, you're now in client rendered land. So you are now in a full single page application. So that's another way of saying that you get the best of both worlds. You are in a position where you can compile to static. You get the benefits of the performance. You have a very small DDoS service, if any, and it's extremely low cost. You can deploy to S3 buckets or for free or Vercel, whatever. There's all kinds of options if you're doing static and you do GitHub pages. But then you get the benefits on top of that of all the dynamic stuff. You got user-generated content. You want to add that? Fine. You can put in your GraphQL queries for that to bring that in asynchronously. You want real-time data, subscriptions and things like that, authenticated. You have a server to use because you're already in a single-page application. That's all available to you. You're not bound by the traditional constraints of static. Declarative behaviors is another great point. Like, what's great about React is that there's all these wonderful libraries out there that do great things, UI features and animations, and that's all available to you in your React app. So, we have these conversations, and I don't know how many of you attend, pre-sales meetings and do RFPs and things like that, and you're architecting these complex websites, and the framing of these conversations is often around like, well, what can we optimize, right? So, how many news articles are they writing? Maybe we can cache that. Maybe this section can go behind some kind of expiry, header, use HTTP caching, set up a WAF, all these things that we're so used to doing because as developers we want to optimize, usually prematurely. But that's kind of in our nature to look at like, how can we take this really non-performant thing that uses a lot of resources and try to consume them and use them in the best way possible. What the idea of static site generation and Gatsby are offering to us is to flip that question on its head, and instead of saying, like, what do we do with this dynamic site and how do we make it faster? What if the question was simply, what parts of the app have to be dynamic? What narrow band of functionality are we really talking about here that has to be dynamic? Building a static website, let's punch holes in that a bit and find out where we need to be dynamic. This completely subverts that whole conversation, right? Now you're in a whole different world because by default you are secure and performant. So if we look at the architecture for a Gatsby site, you have data, and so this is really key to the architecture of a Gatsby site, and we'll get into all the details of how that works. But that can come from anywhere. That can be Markdown, it can be JSON, GraphQL, whatever you have. Bring your own data, and it goes into a Gatsby server. And in between, this is a really key component. The way that data is retrieved is through GraphQL. That GraphQL is running in Gatsby's dev server. It is not going over the network or anything, but that is how Gatsby serves its data, and we'll get more into that. From there, you do your build, and you get a static website, and it can go anywhere. There's some guiding principles of Gatsby that I found, and these are not by any means like on their website or written in stone. This is just my perception, having worked with the framework a lot. And I think that it's a company with a whole lot of identity and a whole lot of ideology, I guess. And so you can kind of cull these things out. The first thing I start with is this concept of the app tuple. So I think at the core of Gatsby is this belief that an app is nothing more than HTML, CSS, and data. If you have structure and you have style and you have stuff to go in to populate that website, that is an app. Like, you don't need to overthink this problem. Like, it's a really simple thing. So another way to look at that, I always think of the box, right? You got the structure, the bow on top is the CSS, and the crap you chuck into the box is your data, right? That's a thing, and once that's done, that's your app, right? So it really helps to kind of like to be a bit deductive in that way and kind of look at what are we really trying to do here, right? So another thing I would call out is that the source of data is just organizational detail. And Gatsby is really good at kind of abstracting all this away. They don't care if your data comes from WordPress or Silverstripe, or if it's files in the file system, or a GitHub repository that you're using as a data source. That should be abstracted away, and data is just data. And here's another graph for you. Sorry, I'm behind on the slides. I'm trying to do them two at once. But yeah, there's another graph for you. I've got whatever CMS you have, markdown files, data, whatever goes into a GraphQL server and deployed. This concept of it's done when you start is really compelling, and I have to be fair here. This is what a lot of them are doing. Next does this as well. It's hard to argue that they don't, certainly, but you know, there's for years we've been fed these frameworks that offer a whole lot of tooling and say, we've given you everything you need to make an awesome website. Go ahead and do it. Like, here's everything you need. And you know, to some extent, Silverstripe CMS is like that. That's kind of the philosophy, is like, we don't want to impose anything on you, but here's some great APIs and good tooling. And that's great for a lot of things. But this idea that when you start your project, it's done, is quite interesting. It's just yours to kind of like bring in the data, make it look nice, but we've done all the stuff that that you're used to worrying about before go live, right? All the details that you know, that last 20% that always takes ages. So out of the box, the right thing is always the easy thing. They do code splitting, prefetching, image optimization, lazy loading. That's all just given to you, right? They want you to make these good decisions. Performance. Basically, they're saying it's yours to stuff up. We've gotten you a 100% lighthouse score, excuse me, service workers and things like that. So there you go. So on your journey with that application, they're your mistakes to make to destroy, you know, performance and optimization. So another thing I would say is the dev experience. Awesome dev experience. React, GraphQL, your favorite CSS library. There's not a whole lot to learn. GraphQL is often picked on for having a steep learning curve, and I would agree. But once you have those technologies under your belt, there's not a whole lot else to learn. You'll never worry about your builds. Those are abstracted away. And they estimate less than 5% of Gatsby projects ever have to touch the build. So out of the box, you're really standing, which is great. They're really good at investing in the community. I just want to touch on this really quickly, because like any open source project that does this, I think is awesome and it deserves a shout out. But any commit gets free swag. Pretty easy to do when you're VC backed and you have 45 million in the bank, but we won't have to talk about that. It is quite nice of them to do it. Any 5 commits gets you premium swag, and you can actually buy swag at their cost, and they'll ship it to you anywhere in the world for free. They have awesome documentation, a Discord channel that's pretty good. You can usually get answers pretty quickly. So, you know, that's just a good example of a community-driven project. So what's it like to use? So we talked about kind of setting up the value statement here. Let's get into kind of the technical details of it. So, big surprise here. It's a JavaScript framework, and you install the thing, and then you run the thing. We've all seen that before. Implied here is that you're using their Gatsby. This is kind of like a recipe. It's almost like if you said, you know, composer, create project, and it just assumes Silverstripe installer or COEP core or whatever. It's just implicit. So, you know, you would have something like Gatsby starter, Silverstripe, Gatsby starter, WordPress, whatever is kind of customized to the needs you're going to have for your project. This is what it looks like in the file system. So you've got your components, pretty typical stuff there. And like Next.js, which you'll hear about in the next talk, they do file system routing. So if you put something in pages, that gets a route, just like your PHP files would. So /page2 is actually going to render server side there. So that's fun. And then most of your work is going to be in this Gatsby node and Gatsby config stuff. That's where most of the coding happens, and obviously your components for style, but pretty straightforward there. And that's what you get out of the box. You can turn on your dev server, and they give you a nice little design. And behind it all, as we said, GraphQL is running, and this is on the local dev server, so you can go ahead and query that. In this example, I've just queried some files. So files are data, right? Because you might want to include an image in your blog post, and maybe you want to optimize it, or everything is a kind of a first-class citizen in that sense. And then we can add some data sources. And I'm not going to go crazy here, like I'm not going to do a Silverstripe specifically, but just as an example of adding a simple data source. Sorry, I'm one behind here. Whoops. Adding an RSS feed. So if we want to just show like the RSS feed of the Silverstripe blog, you install this plugin, you point it at a URL, you give it a name, and then you can run your dev server. Oops. I'm sorry, I'm one behind. This is trickier than I thought. And then we can actually query that. We can query that data. So there's our RSS feed coming into the GraphQL server. Again, not going over the network. This has just been brought into the dev server during the initial build, and it sees that I've got some JSON in there with a title field and a content snippet, and cool. Okay, so now I can work with that, and I can start pulling it into my project. So how does that work? Well, on the homepage, we want to show some blogs. So we're going to query all Silverstripe blog, and marketing is going to be all over me for the second capital S, but that's just the way it goes. I wasn't going to redo the slide. So you want to query all your blogs and render them out. Now, the use static query is going to be a bit odd at this point, but basically all that's saying is like, this is not a dynamic page. We always know this is going to do the same thing. There's no nothing dynamic about it. So you'll see in the forthcoming slides why that matters. But we're always going to show like the latest 5 blogs or something. It's a static query. So that's what we get, and we'll just render it out. Now, if we click on a link, we're going to get a 404 page because the link is absolute. It's an RSS feed, so that's no good. We want local links. We want to stay within the client routing, so we need to fix that. And we can do that. We can actually customize the nodes that come in. So this is an example where you would say, like, okay, if one of these RSS feed blogs comes in, we'll create a new field, and we'll call it relative link, and that's what we'll use in our query now. So we can go on fields. You'll see the new field there called fields. We get the relative link and use that as our link, and that will now be a client side, we'll say within the same host. So that's cool. So we've been able to render like the home page out, but what we really want is this idea of creating dynamic pages, because the number of blogs could change at any time, and we want to make sure that everything has a link. So we have this create pages API, and this is where a lot of the value, I think, is in Gatsby, because you get this opportunity to just say, like, run a query, get everything, and then I'm going to create these pages dynamically. So I'm going to go through and say, the path for the page is the relative link. I want it to use this component in the file system. And then you get to provide it this context. And that's relevant, you'll see in the next slide. But most of the time, that ID is going to be fine for context, because you just need to be able to tell that component at build time what it needs to do. And so an ID tends to be a pretty good identifier for that. So now on our blog post, we have a dynamic query. So if you see at the bottom, we're exporting GraphQL. We have the ID, and that's coming from context. And now we can actually run the query and get the title and content for that detail page, and put the HTML in and all that. So the big question is, sorry, what does this mean for Silverstripe? lowercase s. All right. So about one year, almost exactly 1 year ago, I want to say about 11 months ago, we redid docs.silverstripe.org in Gatsby, and this was kind of a way of proving the technology, seeing what we could do with it, maybe trying some new things, and challenging our assumptions about, how things have to be maintained and hosted at Silverstripe. Obviously, doing docs as a static site was like a no-brainer. I mean, we were paying to host the thing. It was like we literally had people who were, maintaining docs, and it just doesn't make any sense. So that, that problem had to be resolved at some point, and so the opportunity to kind of learn Gatsby and do docs concurrently was a big win. I was going to show the doc site. I don't think we really need to do all that, but I will say there's been really positive results from this. We've seen higher engagement with the doc site. We're obviously paying nothing to host it anymore, so that's good. And we don't have any toil on our DevOps teams looking after the site or getting phone calls at 3 in the morning saying the site's down and all that stuff. So it's been a big win. You commit to the framework and it gets merged and it does a rebuild on Netlify. So we're quite happy with the outcomes there. Now, in terms of like Silverstripe specific Gatsby stuff, this comes at a really, I guess, unfortunate time, because I've personally put a lot of work into making this Gatsby plus Silverstripe stuff happen. Mainly these three libraries that I've been maintaining, and as we're going to get to in the last part of the talk, the GraphQL API is just getting a complete overhaul, and there are just far too many benefits in that new architecture that will help Gatsby, that it really means that it's worthwhile to just kind of basically redo a lot of these. But just to give you an idea of what that kind of looks like, so you would need a source plugin. You would need Gatsby source Silverstripe that would say like, okay, I need to know how to go talk to a Silverstripe site. Give me the URL to the CMS and what's the endpoint. And you would need a module on your CMS installation that kind of exposes all your data or whatever data you want to expose. And then, some kind of library for kind of working with Silverstripe menu, that sort of thing. So in this case, we've said Gatsby source Silverstripe. We've given it a URL. I believe that takes a token now, which is good, so you can get graph content. And then you can just run, it's really that easy. You can just run build site tree because it just has everything. So anything with a link is just going to create a page. And it actually uses the same template inheritance system that you get in SS Viewer. So you can actually just kind of like build the same template structure you have on your server rendered site, and it will choose the templates appropriately. And in most cases, it is that easy that you would get a site with all your content in a basic theme rendering. Some tooling, you have like, you want to show some subnav, let's look at the child pages, that sort of thing. There's some helpers available for you there. It's always aware of what page you're on, so that that's nice. It's always in context. So this is all cool. Like, we've been kind of able to put things together and show like, okay, yeah, this could work. But it's always this, like, again, it's that last 20%, right? So getting from POC into production is always a much bigger story, and sometimes that takes years. So the biggest question out there is, how do you handle draft content, right? So we've gone static, and that's awesome. And you get the performance benefits and the security benefits and all those things that we like. But boy, lingering out there is this giant question of like, if you're doing static, how are you going to deal with previews? Because clients love previews, and draft content is really important. You don't want to be telling clients just hit the publish button and hope for the best, right? So so this is a really big question, and it is not without answers. They are kind of complicated answers, but there are good answers to this, and there's a number of things you can do. One thing I would say is the most obvious solution, I guess, if you start looking into this problem, is that Gatsby offers I'm going to call it a SaaS or a PaaS, I'm not sure. It's something that sits between your repository and the deployment, where they are doing your builds for you. And basically, as proprietors of the software and with all the knowledge they have of the tooling, they're able to do previews really fast. And so they'll give you a dev server with a custom URL and a hook that you can use, so that when you change content on your data source, Silverstripe CMS, for instance, it can fetch what they call a delta fetch, where they say, just get me all the content since last time. And it's able to rebuild that preview really quickly. Another thing you can do is just light up your own dev server. I mean, those are pretty cheap. You can just get a Lambda function somewhere, or well, I guess that wouldn't be a great fit, because those can't run for very long. But you can just get a node server somewhere and deploy, Gatsby develop, and have that kind of running in perpetuity. And they will expose a URL that you can use to rebuild. You can also do kind of a where if there's a preview link in the URL, you could defer rendering in the Gatsby client-side app and actually just go off and run your own query through Apollo or whatever you're using. The problem with that approach, though, is that you're now exposing the CMS URL. At some point, you're going to need to talk to the CMS, and so you might have to set up a proxy or something. But the whole idea of static is that you shouldn't have to expose where your CMS is. You do run into this issue of long build times, and this is getting much, much better. The Gatsby Cloud offering is really touting their incremental builds right now, and demonstrating that it's worth paying for, basically. But we're used to this problem of well, it's static, so anytime something changes, you have to build it from the top down. And the really nice thing about Gatsby being GraphQL based is that because everything is just data and has an identifier, and these queries are written right into all the components, it's able to just know implicitly what the dependency chain is. So when you change just the about page, and it comes back and says, this node with ID whatever changed, it's able to know, okay, that's only used on one page, so I'm going to build one page, and the build is really fast. Obviously, if you change the main navigation, it's going to rebuild everything. But that's gotten a lot better. So incremental builds, it's really about having being really smart about your data fetching, and that's where we on the data side of things, the GraphQL side of things for us needs to be much better and more performant. Form submissions are always a question. You can kind of light up an API somewhere. A Lambda function would work great and handle those form submissions any way you want to. Netlify lets you just write Netlify on the form and it'll just handle it, so that's cool too. But yeah, there's some open questions there. And then another question is how do you want to deal with the user experience? You hit publish, and now obviously it's not going to be live the way you're expecting it to be live. You need to communicate to the user there's a build happening and it's going to be live soon, right? This is going to be delayed. But elephant in the room, doesn't this module still suck? Anyone who's tried to use it in production has a really hard time, because yeah, it's really hard to do right now, and so we need to fix it. And so that's what the last part of this talk is about. So my job at Silverstripe is I work with 17-year-old Ingo. As you can see. And we're on something called the A&D team. A&D stands for Architecture and Design. And so we're always kind of we're always kind of looking forward and kind of seeing what's next and kind of getting a sense of what the trends are and trying things out. And we're always kind of doing these proof of concepts to see what might work and what might not. And we might do some experiments and get some data, and yeah, but it all led to fixing a GraphQL. And that's kind of what we're up to now. And so this is a big thing for us because we see GraphQL as the future. And API-driven stuff is the future. So we need to get this right. And so I'm going to talk a bit about how we got here and why it was such a problem. So we chose this early on with version 4. And GraphQL was we were an early adopter of the technology. I think 2014 is when they announced it. So we weren't too far off, and it wasn't exactly super popular at the time. But credit where credit is due, we did choose the right thing. It's really blown up, and this is the way you do APIs now. So you know, we bet on the right horse, but like now you got to follow through, and so that's where we need to be. We tagged the initial release of GraphQL stable, and that was a mistake. We would take that back if we could, because it meant that we just had to do these incremental major releases, and that's always terrible. So, so lesson learned, and it's also slow. How slow? We have this issue. So you can see, like, as the schema grows, as you start adding more and more types, it just gets slower and slower. So this is actually a screenshot from the pull request where we said, like, how are we going to fix this? And that was like 2 years ago. And so it's a hard thing. And oh, shoot. Excuse me, I'm just, I lost my place here. Oh, no. Why is it doing that? Let me just find, sorry about that. Oh man, it's not working. I'm losing my, shoot.
Slides are moving on the right screen.
Yeah, I know. It's, oh wow, how did we? Shoot. I am. Oh, you know what? I think oh God, this is like Murphy's Law. Okay, cool. You know what it was? Something was on the touch bar. I like, that's it for me and Apple. I'm done. We're getting divorced. Okay, so this is not going to work. This is too slow. We can't be spending, like, even at 10 types, it's just too slow, right? The whole reason we're doing APIs is to be faster and more performant. That's not going to scale. This goes back, as I said, 2 years, and we've had a lot of conversations about how we were going to solve this problem. There's a lot of dynamic code in GraphQL. We have like generic stuff we need to do, like it's just kind of a data object, and you got to know at query time like what kind of query you're going to run. So it's really hard, and so I just want to walk you through a bit about how we research these things at Silverstripe, and I think you're going to find it interesting. I hope you do. So we first attempted to we said, like, why don't we just serialize the schema? That's a great idea. Like, why don't we test that? And so spent like a day or whatever trying to just like crumple it and bend it and break this API and change that one and just see what happens if we can just get the thing to serialize. Couldn't we just cache it and retrieve it? And we finally did it. It was like, I remember that moment. It was right before Christmas break, and it was like we finally did this thing. And were we right? Well, unserialized took 200 milliseconds, and you can't do that. Like, every single query cannot be paying a 200 millisecond penalty. That's not why we're doing this. We need to be much better than that, because now you haven't even talked to the database yet. So, simple problem, very convoluted solution, not going to work. We then looked into code generation, and I rewrote almost the entire thing with code generation and abstracted the hell out of it, and presented a pull request to Ingo, and I believe he got about 2 files into it before I found him at the pub, just trying to like cleanse his brain from all of the hideous developer experience penalties that were imposed on this approach. So we had a flat tire when we built the fusion reactor. Not the greatest idea. Now, of course, we remember everything that happened in March 2020. Major breaking news. Everyone was talking about this. GraphQL PHP 14.0 came out all over the place. Major, major stuff. And I was really interested in what was in the small print because it said like, oh, there's this new lazy loading type thing. And I thought, I think we could actually use that. Why is that so like not even mentioned in the top of the release? And they also talked about type language. And I thought, well, we can cache type language. That's text. That's really easy. So we're going to be able to do this. I was super pumped to get started. And so I hacked something together, and everything burned down because, again, assumptions. So you try something out, and you realize early on that you failed. So failing fast is awesome because literally in this case, it was just the fire is quite accurate there because that's what it did to my CPU. So that wasn't going to work, but we got there. This does have a happy ending. So in GraphQL 4, here's what's going to change, and it's all for the better, I promise. You need to do a code generation step. There's just no way we're going to get a GraphQL server in Silverstripe without persisting the schema in some sort of executable form. You can't be doing anything at query time. When that controller boots, you need to be absolutely ready. And so part of that is having executable code that's already running and sitting in the file system for you, much like Silverstripe templates. And the other part of it is lazy loading types, which was a massive benefit that we didn't have that before, and the new version of the library we use offers that. So we get blazing fast schema boots now. It does require this build stuff, so that's going to affect your deployments. You're going to have to think about, like, is this something that I want to do in a build? Is it something I want to do in a post-install hook? Do I want to just check the GraphQL generated code into the repo, like a JS bundle or something? That's going to be a decision you'll have to work around, and we're still kind of looking into that. So almost everything can be done in YAML, and that's going to sound like I can imagine how that sounds. If I hadn't been working on this for the past 2 months, I can put myself in your shoes. That does sound crazy. But the thing is, like, we realized that all this code, these type and query creators, and they're just glorified arrays. They didn't need to be executable. They were just returning like values, and that didn't make any sense to have that complicated in an API. I'm sorry, the live feed was behind. So there's that slide, everyone. Oops. Oh, second point. So at its core, all you're doing is composing value objects that render PHP code. It's almost like just everything is kind of viewable. Eliminated all the race conditions where things fight with each other, and so everything is just kind of like generating this schema. And we moved manager to schema. Manager is gone, and there's a plugin API where you can distribute a lot of like single concern reusable code, things like versioning and pagination, things like that. And you can do it on a very surgical kind of level, or you can go completely schema wide. It's really cool. Actually, I think I have a slide about that next. And so really all the work was in the resolvers. So your resolvers are going to change. If you're if you have some GraphQL APIs you've written, you're going to have to rewrite them a bit. They have to be static. We cannot do dynamic resolvers. They're not cacheable. You can't generate code based on dynamic functions. So 99% of your resolvers already are. I have yet to see a resolver that refers to this and has to, actually. Most of the time it can be static. So to reduce all that toil of writing resolvers for everything, we have a resolver discovery pattern that will find your resolver implicitly based on convention over configuration, basically. And yeah, so to solve that problem, we can pass context to resolvers. That's really cool. And so you end up with classes that may define many resolver methods, but they can be organized as you see fit. It can be by concern or by feature or whatever you like doing. I talked about plugins. So yeah, you can do schema-wide updates, things like sorting, filtering, pagination, all that kind of stuff. So what does it look like? So now we can do proper queries. This is like turning into a real API now. We can filter, title in recipes or dining, sort, all that stuff. If you have used the previous one, it used to be nodes and edges, and now edges is optional because we don't have cursor-based pagination, and that was always annoying. So that's kind of how it looks. Here's another example. If we say read pages, you can see nested queries are first-class citizens now. So if you have filters you want to run on your nested query, you can do that. But did we achieve the goal of it making it faster? So we're no longer slowing down by the size of the schema. It's always consistent. So no matter how big your schema is, if you do a read one page, you pay 0 penalty pretty much for the schema, and all of your latency is in the controller boot and the query, really. So we've basically eliminated the schema boot, which is awesome. So you can get 70 millisecond response times, and that's just testing on like a Silverstripe cloud instance that we had available. So it wasn't like nothing major. So like I'm gonna check the time here. So I'm like, so technically I'm not over because there's so much stuff, but I'm kind of on the fence on whether I want to do this. So let's have a quick look at the GraphQL-4 API, and I'll just share my screen. This is going to be clunky. I'm going to actually plug into this one. Let's see if this works. And if this doesn't work, then we'll just bag it, and you guys can clap, and I can be on my way. Let's see if this works. Is it going to? Okay. Let's try this. Share screen. All right. How we doing? How we doing? I should check with the chat and see what they think. Stage. Looks okay. He says it looks okay. All right. Cool. All right. So so let's have a look at our config here. So you can see schema's been managers moved to schema, and let's take a look at this. So like we're used to, if you're familiar with the GraphQL API before, like you had to define schemas, and then you get to name which schema you're going to do, and we can do this types, queries, mutations, whatever, and there's a new thing called models, which we'll get into. That's the new scaffolding. So you can do this. You can write this in the config layer, but you don't have to, because what I realized was all this stuff just gets run in a build script, and there's no reason to cache it. It's not, you're never running this at runtime. So the config layer is actually not where you want this to go. It can go somewhere else. Maybe you're super into config and you just really like config-y and you want to put your stuff in config, and I would say to you, hi, Hamish Friedlander, what are you doing at StripeCon EU? I don't know if that's going to land with anyone. So what we can do instead is what I had before. I can say, I'm actually not going to do my config in the config. I'm going to map you to something else, okay? So I can say the source is in, I'm just calling it, I'm calling it's kind of the convention I've been using. And so I've just created a file called schema.yaml, and in here I can start writing some stuff. So now it already knows I'm in the default schema, and I get to say types, queries, etc. And you can see everything's kind of just in this YAML format. I get to say it's a string, it's whatever. I can say int, or I can say whatever. I can do default values, right? So it's pretty flexible in that sense. And then you can just write your queries, and all you have to do is map it to a named type. So this, if you're familiar with GraphQL type language, this should all be pretty clear. So now we've built we built a type, and then we have a query that's going to go off and return that type. So now the question becomes, well, what about the resolver? And this was always the hard part. And so you'll notice in the config up here, I've registered something, and this is just something up to you. You probably want to do this, but you can register this this resolver registry, and basically that is a thing that can take a type name / field name and some other context and determine what the resolver method should be, what the callable should be. So in that case, I've got that class right here, and you see it's empty. And I'm subclassing a default implementation, which is pretty simple. It just kind of checks like, okay, do you have this method? Is it type name, field name? Is it, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Is it, it'll try a bunch of things, and basically the more specific you are, the better it'll match. And so if I now just, I'm going to do a, sorry. So I can write a resolver like this, right? So resolve read countries goes off, and I'm just going to use i18n to go get the countries and return a result, and cool. Now that's just basic types, right? We don't actually work a lot with basic types in GraphQL. We actually want to work with data objects, but that's kind of the foundation of it. So if we look at this new field models, a model is just anything that can inform a type of what its field should be. It's kind of like a consultant for the type in a way. If you want to say like, get me field star, the model has a way of doing that. Now that's abstracted away from data objects. Obviously data object is probably the only thing you're going to work with, but conceivably you could have other things that provided schemas. So you're allowed to say, give me all the fields, give me a read operation, and then I want to do this. I want to add my product object, and I can specify individual fields. I can actually go in here and say like, let's just say truncate, right? And that could be an integer. Truncate it to a certain length, right? I can add an argument there if I want to. So you can do nested fields. You can say reviews and then expose those fields and expose your operations. Now at the end of the day, you need to, once you're done, you need to run a build task, which I've said down here is this, probably a little bit small. Let's see. Where you're going to say dev GraphQL build, and that, oh God, please. So it builds like, this. The build times are something that we're working on. They are cacheable, so it should build incrementally. It won't wipe out your whole thing every time. And so there's the build. And you can see up here, I've got my GraphQL. It puts it in .graphql. That's configurable. And by schema folder name, it's going to separate everything. And so there's all my generated code. I'll just have you take a peek, because looking at generated code is just awesome. Who doesn't love looking at generated code? So there you go. And now, if I switch to the browser, let's see. Is that going to work? Does it work? It doesn't work. No. Oh, no. It's good. It's good. Still good. Still good. Let's see. Let me reload it. Let's see if we get an error. Why did I do this? Review. No, we can't do. Oh, title. Sorry, that's not correct. Reviews. Rating. Did I expose rating? Let's see. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah. Now that's. Let's see what happens when I do that. Okay, cool. That's a bit faster. So that was a slow query because it was unpaginated. But that's about as far as I want to go into live coding. So where are we with, I'm going to go back to this slide now because, yeah. we are still kind of proving this, but it is an integral part of getting Silverstripe to be a much more API-driven platform, and kind of challenging a lot of the assumptions we have about how we build our sites. So if you want to get involved, we're about to merge the thing, and then we can start kind of playing around with what this is going to look like long term, and how we're going to kind of educate developers about things like builds. But give a shout out to me, or anyone in the community really, if you'd like to be an early adopter, because there's nothing that helps more than early adoption with these things. We need someone eventually has to kind of take the risk. We can't stabilize until someone does. So if you want to be that person, by all means, come on in and jump on the fire. I can tell you it's quite nice in here. This has been just such a pleasure to speak at StripeCon EU. I hope everything went well with the technical stuff, and I do apologize for that, but I think that was bound to happen. And just thank you to everyone who has made this happen. So that's me. Good night. Good morning.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Aaron. I'd say we forget all about the technical issues, because one of today's mottos is content first.
Yeah,
and well, the content was great.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It was,
Yeah, no worries.
You did very well handling that. Are you still on? Are they asking you questions?
Yeah, Julian's happening.
Oh, cool. So there's some questions. Yeah.
A lot of questions happening in the chat. Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, cool. Oh, nice. Okay.
Can you unmute Studio?
Oh, there we go.
So you want to go through the questions in the chat? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that works. So you guys.
Yeah, and it has been brought to my attention that we should read the questions out loud, because in the recording nobody can see the chat. So it'll be good to read the question first before you give an answer. So first question, Werner Kraus is asking, what is the current state of the Gatsby Silverstripe module?
Yeah, so like I said, it's a really interesting time to be asking that. My goal when I knew I was going to be speaking at StripeCon, and I apologize if this was a bit of a bait and switch, because I did say, like, we're going to build a Gatsby site in Silverstripe. I think just with GraphQL 4 being kind of emergent, it just doesn't make sense to keep investing in the old one. What I see for the Silverstripe Gatsby module is something that's much more reliant on the GraphQL API of Silverstripe than it is what it is right now. And I don't know if you've played around with it, but right now all that Gatsby module does for Silverstripe is just dump the database. And so we can actually we can save a lot of time and clean things up quite a bit if we just use the GraphQL source. We have a really good GraphQL API right now. We can actually just use that instead of inventing our own thing. So the future of the Silverstripe Gatsby module is that it will be a much smaller footprint, and hopefully just a faster integration. So that's kind of where I'm heading next. So stay tuned.
Okay, cool.
There's a question about
Next question.
Yep. Can I answer this question about lessons? So Martina has asked about, do you plan to make lessons for using this tool with Silverstripe? So not in the traditional sense of when they were up on the lessons page, like old school, but definitely, yeah. So I have plans to do a tutorial on, first of all, upgrading a GraphQL site for those of you who are using GraphQL 3 and want to get into 4, just showing you the migration path, but also just that experience of like what it's like to build a decoupled site in Silverstripe. It's something a lot of us actually at Silverstripe are working on. We have like hack days and so yeah, 100%, yeah. Anything else from the chat room?
More questions. Come on, guys. This, for most of us, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to shoot questions at Aaron. Don't be shy.
I'm going to have a lot of fun reading through all the feedback after this. It's fun.
Yeah, there's one.
Sorry, did I miss one?
There it is, yeah.
Oh, save and publish. Yeah, this is interesting. So there's a couple things here. We've been talking a lot about event-driven paradigms in. I'm sorry, I'll read the question first. Any approaches to save and publish in Gatsby build integration? That's what I'm answering. So we've been talking a lot about event-driven paradigms in the CMS, and so this came about with our version snapshots module. Another thing we'd encourage you to check out that makes versioned a lot better, I guess. That would be my elevator pitch in the few moments I have. But yeah, so we started doing event-driven stuff, and we're finding all these new use cases for it. Like, it just keeps coming up. Like, maybe this needs to be a core dependency, the event dispatcher. So this is a perfect case where you would say, like, hey, this event happened in the CMS. It doesn't necessarily have to be programmatic. Like, we tend to think about like on, before, right, and like all these kinds of hooks. But like the idea that like something happened in the CMS, a user did something, is quite compelling. So that's how I see that working. Is like, there was a publish of a grid field, someone interacted with a grid field, and we now need to send a post hook to Netlify or whatever your thing is, whatever you need to do. Basically, I could see it kind of starting as like a Silverstripe webhooks mod, kind of go. Anything else? Cool. Switch to cam. Oh, yeah.
People want to see you.
Right. Yeah. Can I do that? Oh. This is so hard. Can you see me now?
Not really.
There we go. How's that? No? Is that a no?
That's a no.
Oh. What is likely to be the main downside to content editors when using Silverstripe this headless way? Yeah, so I think it's hard to argue no. So the build time stuff, I really do see. So that in preview, I think those are just the big obstacles we got to figure out. Like, if we have like it's all about setting expectations, right? You just have to have a clear path to like, what do I need to do in this situation? And if it's a matter of like just effectively communicating to the client that builds take 2 minutes, or and notifying when it's done, I think that's where kind of the work is just clarifying that expectation. Preview, I think, is a big one. We have to get that to be instant. One thing I didn't mention is that Gatsby Cloud, which again I would probably recommend as the preview solution, they offer like these kind of like plug-in solutions. Like, you can say, well, oh, I'm Drew. I don't know what. Like, I'm Contentful, and I'm using a Contentful data source, and they'll just integrate. Like, it's all set up, right? So you can be in that club. And I see Silverstripe is getting there, because I look at what we're doing with GraphQL, and I think it's really possible. They have some strict criteria for that, and one of them is that you can deliver a preview in 5 seconds or less. And so we haven't been able to demonstrate that yet, but I think with the GraphQL changes, we're going to get there. So yeah, build times and preview both can be accomplished with the work we're doing right now. I think that's where we're headed.
Okay. Maybe one last question, because we're already running a little late.
Yeah.
Colin was asking, what would you say is the main advantage of using Gatsby approach over, say, Varnish or the like for server-sided caching?
Yeah, and it's important to keep this in context that like this isn't a battle of Gatsby versus Next.js. It's not a battle of Jekyll versus Gatsby, right? It's like, this is the big category of like, how do you do secure, performant websites? And this is part of the conversation, right? And so I'll give kind of my perspective on it, which is just that you're not going to beat the idea of a static build that's deployed to something like S3. Has zero opportunities for failure in terms of a DDoS attack or a security issue or anything. It's just there's nothing dynamic happening, right? Whereas with a WAF or if you're doing more, I guess, if you're choosing what you're caching and kind of creating that layer yourself, that you're opening up more opportunities for that. The other thing is like, I see a lot of value in just this whole client rendered thing. Like I love the idea that like you could build a really not only a performant website and a static website, but your UI, your UX team is now writing in React. And I just love that idea that like you just open up all these possibilities, that everything is just awesome by default, right? Like when you might build your little widget and you insert it with Vue and you kind of drop it in there and it works with everything else, and like it's great. But like with Gatsby, because you're React top to bottom, it's just always going to be awesome. Like you're just always dealing with those kinds of more advanced UX components. So